So I used to do youth ministry with a group of people, and one of the things that we would do is we would do all kinds of fun games. I still do fun games for our youth now, but one game that we did that was a total blast is we set up these tables. We set up these tables, and on this side of the table were two boxes. On this side of the table were two boxes, and in the middle between the tables was another box. And so what we would do is we would bring we had three kids that came up and do it. So we had each one go through it one at a time, and they had to go through it as quickly as possible. So they had to lift up the box here, lift up the box here, and lift up the box here, lift up the box here, and then lift up the box in the middle. And so what happens is, so for example, the first box might be like shoes, apple, quarters, nickels, could be that. And then what happened is when they would lift up the middle box, my head was there. So it would like shock them, kind of thing. So then what we would do, so we did it with the first kid that came through. And so all the other students were sitting there, and then what will happen is the leader brings them in, and the leader kind of works them up into a frenzy to kind of get them to go through it as quickly as possible. And then what would happen is some of the kids now that knew what was happening with the students going in front, they would yell, go, 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 because they wanted to see them scream. But there would also be this one voice that was in the background going, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And the interesting thing to me was that voice that was in the back, that was warning, that was protecting, was the voice that went unheard. And so here's the question: why? Why? And I'll get to that in a minute. But I kind of want to set up like that thought, and we're gonna go back to that. But for those of you that may not know, we are in the middle of a series called Certainty in the Times of Uncertainty. And again, what fueled this is, even conversations that I've been having with some of the students that I've been able to interact and talk with. One of the things they wrestle with, really because of the fires, is fear. And so I just thought, with that being the case, with so many people struggling with just the fear of the unknown, that what if we did a series called Certainty in the Times of Uncertainty? So that no matter what happens, we can have that confidence and be able to know that we can persevere and push through, even when our fears begin to amplify and magnify themselves. So week one, we said that as a follower of Jesus, one of the things that we want to do is we want to move from what if to even if. So the idea with what if is, what if this happens? What if that happens? And that's really driven by fear. And then even if says, even if that happens, I'm confident, I'm going to trust in God and in who He is. And then last week, what we talked about is we said that we shine the brightest when we are the best version of ourselves when it matters most. And so if you missed any of those, please, you can go back, you can watch them on our website and on our live. Oh, speaking of live stream, welcome back. We're back now. So I'm glad that you are able to join us for that as well. And thank you for your patience as well. So we're so glad to have you here with us. But today, there's something that I wanted to specifically look at. There's a passage that many of us may be familiar with. And when I read it, you'll go, oh, yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that verse before. But what we may not be familiar with is what is before this verse and why it is so significant. Why it's so significant. And I really do hope that this passage that we're going to be looking at today speaks to us. Now, it's very interesting to me that when you read through the Bible, for example, if you had a Bible that was like a physical Bible, pretty much every Bible, when you open it up and you open up to the middle, it's always the book of Psalms, pretty much always. And I think one of the reasons why is just because it's pretty massive. I mean, it has 150 different books that are in it, in this one book. And really, they're not really books. They're not even really chapters. They're really songs. So it's really composed of 150 different songs that are composed of songs. It's composed of 150 songs. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at one of those songs. Matter of fact, the interesting thing was, as I was researching it, the notes for the psalm that we're going to read today says to be sung in soprano voices. No, I'm not going to do that. I haven't been able to hit soprano since like third grade, so we're definitely not gonna do that today. But this song is so powerful. And so the psalm that we're going to read, or we're going to be looking at today, is Psalm 46. And like I said, there's a verse that we will read that you'll go, oh, many of you will go, oh, then I may have heard that today. But it's set up. So this psalm is actually composed of three stanzas. And so we're going to look at it stanza by stanza. So here's the first psalm. It says in Psalm 46, verses 1 through 3, it says, God is our refuge and strength. God always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. And then it says, interlude, which means another translation of that is word Selah. But it's just saying that that's the end of the first stanza. So I wanted to look at, well, what is in this first stanza? What is it composed of? First of all, it says, God is our refuge. Another word for refuge is a place of safety. He is my place of safety. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, I love it when it rains. What about you? Do you like it when it rains? I do. There's something about sometimes at night, especially when it's raining really hard, I'll turn off the TV and I'll turn off any source of sound. And if it doesn't blow into my house, I'll even open up the slider and then just listen to the rain. It's just incredible. Sometimes here at church, actually, I love being here at the church when it rains as well, because right outside this door is our courtyard. Over our courtyard is this metal awning. And so what happens is the metal awning, when the rain hits it, it kind of amplifies the sound of the rain. And so there have been times when if the rain's not blowing underneath the awning, when it starts raining, I'll actually take my laptop and I'll go outside and I'll work outside so I could be there with the rain, being able to listen to it. Matter of fact, some of my best sermons have been written when it rained. And some of you may be saying, well, it needs to rain more often then, buddy. you know, uh, but I just love it. But also, wouldn't you agree, though, that there is a difference between being in the shelter and enjoying the rain compared to being in the rain? Exactly. It's not as enjoyable, is it? It's not as fun, is it? Last year, we took some of our high school students here at the church to a camp with a group called Young Life, which we're going to go again this year. So I would love for us to take as many high school students with us as possible. Um, but one of the days, there was this plan for an outdoor event that we were going to do, and all of a sudden, like rain suddenly came, and it started to like hail. I mean, like, and when I say hail, like it was like hail. It was like one hail of a storm. Like no, maybe that's too far. But it was like it was like significant, like hail. And so for it was so much hail that it looked like snow was falling on the ground. I mean, that's how much hail it was. And so for some of the students who had never seen hail like that, it was like, oh, this is like really cool. But we were like, get out of the hail because there's also lightning and that kind of thing happening. So what we decided to do is we had just finished having a meeting in our cabin with our students. And I didn't want to walk them through the hail to get to the club room without knowing what was going to happen with the event. Was the event going to be canceled or not? So I decided, hey, why don't you guys stay here and I'm going to brave the elements. And so I walked out with my umbrella. The umbrella's blowing, the umbrella's blowing. The rain and I'm getting and hail hurts. I didn't realize how much hail hurts. But my umbrella be going, I get hit in the face, kind of thing. So then I get in, find out what's going on, and then I do the brave walk back and get back in. But and then when I got in, like from here down was completely soaked. And there's a big difference between being in the storm compared to being sheltered and covered during the storm. And so literally what this passage is saying is, God, you are my refuge. When the storm comes, you are my protector. You are the place where I can turn and find protection when the storm is. And here's the thing, and the reality is, Scripture says that it rains on the just and the unjust. Like life is going to storm. There are going to be rains. So the thing that we have to decide is, do I want to walk through this rain covered or uncovered? Protected or unprotected? Now, I want to make sure this is really clear too. Protection does not mean that everything's going to work out the way that we want it to. Protection doesn't mean that the storm may suddenly stop. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But what it does mean is God's going to walk through the storm with me. And we'll dig into how important that is in a moment. But it says, you are my refuge. And then also in this passage, it also says that you are my strength. You are my strength. When I don't have the power to continue to carry on in the midst of the storm, you are my strength. You are the one that I will rely on for the power to be able to press through this. I love what it says in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2, and you can read that right on the screen as well. It says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not what? When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be. Yeah, so the fires or the flames will not consume you. So you're going to go through the storms, you're going to go through the fires, you're going to walk through the flames, but you will not be consumed by it. You will not be destroyed by it. And there's a point that we're going to make towards the end of the message where all of this is building towards, and you will see with this point why it's so important for us to understand that passage and exactly what that passage means and how it impacts us in the way that we live our lives as well. How vital it is that we understand that. But when you're in a situation where you feel like, I just can't, then God is saying, look, lean on me. Let me be your strength. And let's walk through this together. Let's continue to persevere through this together. And then here's what this does is it's what it establishes. God is my refuge. God is my strength. And then it says, basically, when the earthquakes come, and it says and it also says when the mountains crumble. Now think about how significant that is. When the mountains crumble, like if you've traveled, if you've been on a mountain, like you don't think about like the mountain crumbling while you're on it. Why? Because a mountain is a symbol of strength, of power. And it's saying that, and it talks about these, it says when the waters rage, when the oceans rage. So in other words, this mountain is constantly under attack from this overwhelming flood. And that overwhelming flood will eventually wipe this mountain out. So if I could say it, but eventually it will wipe this mountain out. And so with that in mind, then what this passage is encouraging with is to understand that even if that's the situation, God is still my refuge. God is still my strength. So therefore, I will put my trust in him. So what this passage reminds us of then is, again, what am I looking at when the storms rage? Am I looking at the mountains that's crumbling underneath my feet? Am I looking at the waters that is rushing toward me? Or am I looking at God? Because he's my refuge and he's my strength. And in a minute, it's going to talk about how do we be able to recognize that he is. But that's the first part of this. Now, going into the second stanza, it says in Psalm 46, verses 4 and 5, it says, a river brings joy to the city of our God, the sacred home of the Most High. God dwells in that city. It cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. God will protect it. So now, the first stanza kind of sets the tone in looking at God. And then what it does is it looks at our circumstances. And now what it does is it gives us a picture of what is it like to be in the dwelling place of God. And basically what it is saying is that the dwelling place of God is protected. It is watched over. Now, why is that so significant? It's because now you have to understand that since Jesus Christ has ascended into heaven, and the moment that you said yes to Jesus, the moment that you gave your life to him, there became this truth that exists about you that is so important for you to believe. And so if we understand that and then we correlate that to this passage and what this passage is saying, then it should also give us peace and comfort. So there's a great passage that kind of talks about this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, it says, don't you realize that your body is what? The temple of what? The temple of the Holy Spirit. So in other words, your body, the moment that you said yes to Jesus, the Holy Spirit now lives in you, dwells in you. Your body is the temple. You now please come to church. That's important to be amongst the body. But the reality is, wherever you are, God is with you because He now lives in you. He lives in you. So His presence is there. And so He lives, it says, who lives in you and was given to you by God. And then I love this. This is something really interesting. It says, you don't belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. Now, just to let you know, this passage is really talking about sexual purity. That's what it's really looking at, is making sure that you align your life in such a way to where you are honoring God with your body sexually. That's what this passage is looking at. But there's a truth that is there that is so significant that we can't ignore, that we look at this idea that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. That is a categorical truth. So now think about this. We just read a passage that said the city of our God. And literally, what this passage is talking about is the dwelling place of God. And so what this passage is saying to us is wherever God dwells is protected. And so if God lives in you, guess what you are? You're protected. You're protected. And it's also very interesting to me because in the first stanza that we looked at, it talked about the raging waters. The raging waters. You know, it talked about that. But in this passage, it talks about the waters. And I wonder if it's the same waters where in the storm, the raging water brings destruction and fear. But where God dwells and where that place is protected, the water brings joy, peace. It goes on and it says this in that second stanza. It says, the nations are in chaos and their kingdoms crumble. God's voice thunders and the earth melts. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Interlude. So now we've reached the end of the second stanza. But notice what it talks about with those nations that are without God. It says that they are in chaos. That they are in chaos. And then it says that they crumble. Well, it kind of makes sense. Because if I'm relying on this mountain, for example, the mountain of my finances, the mountain of my career, or the mountain of my job, the mountain of my friendships, maybe the mountain of my relationships, if I the mountain of whatever the mountain may be that I am relying on for my strength. If that mountain is washed away by the waters and the mountain crumbles, then guess what happens to me? I crumble. I crumble. But if God is my dwelling place, if He is my dwelling place, then I am in the position where no matter what happens around me, I can be at peace. Now, let me tell you this. It's important for you to understand. Is it possible to be at peace and be confused? Yeah. Is it possible to be at peace and have fear? Yeah. Is it possible to be at peace and still wonder, like, God, where are you? I know that you're with me. I just have a hard time seeing it. Yes. And that's why when we talk about the main idea of this passage or of this talk today, when we get there, that shows us how it's possible to be at peace even when our mind and our emotions feel chaotic or in turmoil. That God, I can still be at peace with you because I have this dichotomy that exists in me. And with this dichotomy, then I can decide which part of that dichotomy do I want to live on. And so the idea is again, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week, is with fear and with confusion. And if we feel those things are normal. The difference is when those things begin to drive us. That's what kills our peace. That's what kills our peace. But also, another thing that kills our peace, denial. Denial kills our peace. And what happens with denial is denial never gives us the opportunity to really process, because that's the key to peace. It's processing what it is that you're wrestling with, what you're thinking about, what you're going through. And God, I want to process this with you. I want to process this with you. And then God, help me. Where am I not leaning on you? Help me to be able to figure that out. Help me to see it. But it's about being able to be in the process. And then in Psalm chapter 48, 46, verses 8 and 9, now that we go to the next stanza, it says, come, see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction upon the world. He causes wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He burns the shields with fire. Um, that sounds pretty intense, doesn't it? It really does. But what this passage is also communicating to us is the extent that God will go to be able to protect his people. That's the extent that he will go to protect the people that he loves. That's the extent that he will go to protect that which and where he dwells. Now, here's the thing that's really important though. When you're in the midst of the battle, you may not be able to see it. Most likely you won't be able to see it. Part of that depends on your focus and how you're processing what it is that you're going through. But sometimes it feels impossible as we're facing. So that's why this is what brings me to the main point of the message. How do I recognize when God is at work? There is an essential truth that we must understand, and you can see that right on the screen. The battle is not what your circumstance is doing to you, but in you. The battle is not what your circumstance is doing to you, but in you. So I can't control my circumstances. I can't. I can't control everything outside of my circumstances. I can't. I can't even control if the person next to me is going to merge right in front of me and cut me off. I can't. But what I can control is what it does in me. And really that's what this passage is all about, is what are the circumstances, the chaos, the turmoil, the crisis, the catastrophe, the things that you're facing. What is it doing in you? What is it producing in you? That's the thing that we have to figure out, because that will determine the depth and the magnitude of the joy that we practice in our lives. What is this battle doing in me? See, here's the thing: if envy is right, enemy can be at peace no matter how much the storm rages. If enemy is connected to God, enemy can be connected to love when everyone around me is acting unloving. If enemy is connected to God, enemy could be in a position of confidence when everything else around me says I should be afraid. When enemy is connected, then enemy gives me the ability to continue to be able to persevere when everything around me says quit, throw in the towel, give up. So this is why it's important for us to constantly examine what's happening in me. So now we come to this verse that many of us may know. But before I get there, I want to go back to the other statement. Why is enemy so important? I want to go back to what I started with. Remember, I talked about like why is it? Why is it that in the back you have don't do it, don't do it, don't do it? Why is that being confused with? And haven't you noticed that when you are in a situation where things are challenged, have you noticed how life increases the level of the noise that is around us and in us? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that? As a matter of fact, for many of us, what happens is we get to a place where now, and here's the thing, this is what I believe, is that God's voice may be speaking, but because of the loudness of everything that is around us, God's voice is just another voice in the noise. So that makes it difficult. So that's why what happens in me is so important. Because what happens in me determines my ability to be able to tune out all of the other voices to say, oh, that's God's voice. It's God's voice. When my kids were young, one of the things that I made a commitment to do is I made a commitment that I would never be the father who yells at their child in public. Made a commitment that I would never do that. I would never be the dad who publicly embarrasses their kids. Made a commitment. I would never do that. And to this day, my kids remember this. So what I would do is if I wanted to get my kids, my one of my children or all of my children, if I wanted to get their attention, I would just go, and all of a sudden it'd be like, so that's what I would do. And the interesting thing is my kids were able to, out of all the noise that is around them, they were able to, oh, that's that snap. Like, and they were able to tune in. And then I was able to get their attention. And then I would be like, I would give like hand signals, you know, but, or I would do those kind of things because again, I never wanted to publicly humiliate my children. But with that in mind, why is it then for us? Why is it that it becomes so difficult for us to hear God's voice in the middle of the noise? I found an article, and so I decided to put the article to you guys. And here's what it says in the article. It says, alert fatigue or alarm fatigue occurs when someone is exposed to too many emergency notifications too often. And, a, and in a world where we are constantly connected, it is easy to become desensitized to alerts, messages, and notifications, which can mean that important information gets missed. And so that's an article called Cutting Through the Noise in the Crisis. So is that kind of an apt description? How do you know? Because sometimes I'll get notices on my phone and be like, oh my gosh, especially on those, and I'm sure that you have those days where it seems like everybody and their mama and every app on your phone is all sending you notifications all at once. So then what will happen is in those times, like there'll be moments where Heidi has texted me or my kids have texted me and I have missed a text. because I'm just so tired of all the other notifications that are coming through on my phone. And so it's kind of the same way with God, is we get so inundated with sound and with noise and with everything that is around us. We become so inundated by it that as a result, when God is speaking and God is trying to get our attention, we miss it. We miss it. So then here's the question. How do we change that? And that brings us to this next part of the stanza. Psalm 46, verses 10 and 11. And this is the part that many of you may know. Be still and what? Be still and know that I am God. So now when you see that, for me, when I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness. Seeing what happened before it adds even more power to it, doesn't it? Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. So, what is the key to being able to recognize when God is at work, when God is moving in the middle of the chaos? What is the key to being able to do that? Be still. Be still. Shut off all the noise, shut off all the notifications. And sometimes the loudest voice that screams at us in the middle of our trial is the one in here. Amen? One in here. So the challenge is to learn how to quiet that voice so that God, I am in a position where I am able to hear. And now, when it is silent, see how much more stands out? Now I'm able to, yes, God, I'm able to tune in. When I quiet my mind, my heart, my spirit, it also puts me in a place where I'm able to see sometimes God at work, even in the most minute ways in my circumstance. It may not be working out the way that I wanted to, but I go, oh, my goodness, God, you were doing something when that phone call came through. Oh, God, you were at work when that email came through. Oh, God, you were at work when that friend of a friend that talked to another friend that happened to have what I needed. You were at work. See, the problem with catastrophe and chaos is that it creates a frenzy. And in many ways, a frenzied response is understandable, right? I mean, I can only imagine when people in Palisades or Eaton were looking at this fire coming down the hill or approaching their home. That situation was a frenzied situation. And maybe our chaos and our catastrophe is not to that extent. But I do believe that it's kind of like this whirlpool that sucks us in to this frenetic pace as we're trying to process and figure it out. And so, what being quiet does is it stops the frenetic pace. And it's a willful choice that you have to make because honestly, it feels counterintuitive because your mind is saying do something. Your mind is saying find a solution. Your mind is saying work or circumstance. Your mind is saying make phone calls. Your mind is saying reach out. Your mind is saying check the bills. Your mind is saying find insurance. Your mind is, and so you get to this frenzy state and you feel like I got to do something because something has to get done. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is nothing. Now, don't stay at nothing, right? But sometimes the best thing is just stop. It's just stop. even if it's, you know what, I just want to stop for a couple of minutes, just get my mind in place and my spirit in the right place. Be still and know that I am God. Because here's the thing is there are certain elements of stress that we can begin to allow to take over us when we find ourselves in that situation. For example, when there's a threat, your body's natural response is alarm. And that kind of makes sense, right? Threat, run, or threat, fight. The problem is if you don't stop and still yourself, then you can stay in that state of mind. And I don't know about you, but there have been times when I've been in that state of mind, and the problem with that state of mind is now everything becomes a threat. And I start to see threats everywhere. And so what I have to do is just stop. Or another thing that happens is what your body begins to do is also it begins to try to resist because that's natural. It's trying to resist what's happening around you because your body's trying to protect you. So you go into the state of resistance. But the problem is, if you stay in that state of resistance, then it can result in illness. It can result in poor sleep. And haven't you had that happen? Haven't you had those things where you're in a state of crisis and you lay in bed and you know what I hate? Don't you hate when you can't sleep and you look at the clock and you're thinking, surely it's been like an hour and it's been like 5 minutes. Isn't that the worst? And then have you ever done this too? Like you get yourself in that frenzy and it's like, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I want to sleep. I can't sleep. Oh my goodness, I can't sleep. Right? And so you get yourself worked up even more by the fact that you can't sleep. So that's another reason. And then the other thing is exhaustion. Is we just get ourselves overwhelmed. And the interesting thing is with exhaustion is we're not overwhelmed to the point where we sleep. We just overwhelmed to the point where we just shut down. We become catatonic. So this is why it's so important for us to be able to be still and be quiet. There's something that Mother Teresa said that I thought was really, really good. So I wanted to share that with you guys. She said, we need to find God, and he cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is a friend of silence. See how nature, trees, flowers, grass grows in silence? See the stars, the moon, and the sun, how they move in silence. We need silence to be able to touch our souls. Silence. Now, here's the thing. I don't know about you, and I may have shared this before, but when I was a kid, I was a latchkey kid. And for those of you that don't know what a latchkey kid is, uh, a latchkey kid would be a kid who would come home and mom and dad are still at work, so they might be home for hours before mom comes home. For me, it was mom, and I'd walk in my house and I'd hear drip, drip, yeah. And so as a kid, I trained myself to hate silence because I saw silence as something to be afraid of. Because you never knew when Jason Voorhees was around the corner, ready to use his machete to strike me down. he never he never knew. So I was afraid of silence. Here's the church. I'll be honest with you. There's Here's the church at night. It gets really dark, especially in this back hallway here. Yeah, teachers, I don't go back there, especially that hallway back there. And I remember once I was back there, and I was back there doing something, and I heard, "All right, I'm leaving. I'm not. Let's go investigate that. I've seen that movie. I've seen that movie. I'm not doing that. Um, so here's what I started doing is I'm trying to teach myself now how to be okay with silence. Matter of fact, we live in a society right now that struggles with silence. I'll give you another example. Have you ever been in a situation where you're sitting around with a group of people and it gets silent, and then you start to feel like somebody say something, somebody say something, and then you feel like, okay, I'll say something because you're so uncomfortable with the silence. We live in a society right now where every silent moment that we could have is filled with something: television, social media, scrolling, emails, internet. We can go through the list, right? Every moment that, and if you have children, silence is out the window, right? At least until they go to bed. And then they get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and stand over your bed and freak you out. But that's a whole different thing. But we live in a world right now that really struggles with silence. And I would say it's one of the greatest things that we have. So I did some research and to find out what are some things that we can do to help us begin practicing silence in our lives. And so that's what this handout is for you to be able to take this and utilize this as a tool, for yourself as well. So so 8 keys to practicing life-giving silence. Number one, schedule a time. Make it a discipline that you build into your life. Schedule the time that you set aside between you and God, that this is just going to be the time that I am silent. Number two, find a quiet place. Find a quiet place. So make sure that wherever it is that is silent, that is a place where you won't be disturbed. It's a place, and my kids really believe that I have ADHD. you know, I'll be driving down squirrel. And Faith said like that. I think you have ADHD, which is probably true. So for me, I do have to find a place where I'm not distracted by everything. So find a place that's quiet where you will not be distracted. Number three, set a timer. Set a timer. Uh, because if you just decide to be indiscriminately quiet, a minute seems like a long time. It does. So here's what I want to encourage you to do with practicing silence is practice silence at a pace that you can at least start with and be comfortable with. So for example, set your timer on your phone and set it for 5 minutes and just try being silent for 5 minutes. Now, here's the thing is when you first start practicing the silence, this time of silence is a time of silence. It's not a time to pray. It's not a time to read your Bible. It is just a time to be silent. Just to be silent. We'll get to the prayer and reading your Bible in a second, but just be silent. So like I said, start with 5 minutes. I was reading one thing, it was like, start with 15 minutes. I was like, do you know how long that is? Do you know how long that is? You know? Uh, so start with that. And then we also encourage, relax your body. Relax. So when you are being silent, relax your body. And here's the thing too. This is really important. Once you decide to relax your body, don't beat yourself up if you fall asleep. Because for some of you, be like, oh, Lord in heaven, the silence, right? If that happens, don't beat yourself up for it. You probably needed that rest. Now, if you start in the morning and wake up at like midnight, that's a whole thing, right? But don't beat yourself up. But relax. And sometimes I've seen like the mindfulness kind of thing, and sometimes I'm always kind of leery of the mindfulness thing. But there is one thing that I've done that I've listened to when I go to bed at night. And so there's this app where I will listen to the Bible at night when I'm going to sleep. But before they start reading the passage, they'll say something like, "Feel the muscles in your arms and relax the muscles in your arms." And so I kind of walk through it, and I'm out, you know. But relax your body, relax your body. And then the next thing to do is quiet your mind. Is quiet your mind, especially when you're coming from a state of frenzy. Quiet your mind. And here's one of the things I want to do to help you as well is when you decide to quiet your mind, what I want to encourage you to do is if thoughts start popping into your head, and they will, for some of us, the reality is we don't take time to think about our lives because we're so busy. And then when we sit down and we're silent, like all of these things are coming to mind. So here's what I want to encourage you to do is when something comes to mind. So when you find your place and you relax, have a pad and a pen right next to you. And then what happens is when something comes to your mind, write it down and then put it down. Okay, I'll get to that later. Something else comes up, write it down. I'll get to that later. So for some of us, it takes a while to learn how to quiet our minds. So those thoughts that come into your mind, don't beat yourself up for it. And the thing is, and here's the thing too, don't think about it. I'm being silent. Don't think about it. I'm being silent. I'm being silent. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. I'm being silent. You're right. So write it down and then hopefully give yourself permission to move on because you're kind of going to come back to it. But quiet your mind. And then be in the moment. Be in the moment. Silence is not about your past. Silence is not about the future. Silence is, I'm just going to have this moment right now. Even if the future is, oh my goodness, in 10 minutes, I have to pick up the kids. No, just be in the moment. Be present and just enjoy that silence. And then the next step is learn to return. So what we meant by learn to return is learn how to come out of the silence. Because if you come out of the silence and jump right into the noise, it's a huge transition. So what you do is, let's say you set the timer for 5 minutes for silence. And then once you're done with your silence, maybe set your timer for another 5 minutes and use that time to pray. Use that time to read your Bible. Use that time to get you back in the state of reconnecting with whatever you're going to now begin to step into. But learn to return to your situation. And then number 8, this is most important. Practice before crisis. Practice silence before you find yourself in a crisis. Because if you wait till you're in a crisis, right? If you wait till then, it's almost impossible. But if you practice silence before you're in crisis, then what happens is when you're in crisis, then what you'll do is it becomes more of a muscle memory. So you're able to be in that place and kind of quiet all the other things that are around you. So these are tools. I want to encourage you, go home and practice this. Give it a try. And for those of you that do, come back and tell me about your experience. How was it for you? What was it like? I would love to hear about that, from you and what your experience is or what your experience was as you've gone through it and do it. But I will say that it is one of the absolute most life-giving things that you can do. And what happens is when you're finally able to silence yourself, then it does become easier to be able to recognize when God is speaking to you or when God is encouraging you. It becomes easier to recognize when God is at work. Now, notice I didn't say it becomes easy because sometimes there are things that God may do that you may not realize until after you come out of the situation, or you may not realize till a couple of years later. For me, it was 20 years after my abuse happened where I was able to go back and look, oh my goodness, God, that's where you were. Oh my God, that's where you were. Oh, that's why that happened. God, that's where you were. So just to let you know that it may not be until after you come out of that circumstance and maybe even years down the line where you're able to go back and begin to think about, okay, God, those are the ways that you were showing up in that moment. But start practices. I would love to hear your thoughts. So again, here in Encounter, what we want to do is we want to help you to grow in your love relationship with God, your love relationship with others, and your love relationship with yourself. And so with that in mind, here at Encounter, what we try to do is after every message, we want to encourage us to find principles that we can utilize from the message that will help us in those areas. So the first one is love up. Because I love our relationship with God. And that is to calm your soul to recognize the work of God. Calm your soul to recognize the work of God. So being quiet. Next is love out. Calm your soul so that you can be a better servant of others. Calm your soul so you can be a better servant of others. There's something about when you're able to be in that place of silence, and then you're able to come out of it because of the fact that you've connected with God. It also awakens a level of compassion. That is, it was mind blowing to me to see how during the fires there were people who lost their home, but yet they're donating to try to do what they can with whatever they had to try to help people out, even if it was just donating their time. The level of compassion for others was just incredible. And here's what you'll find is when you're silent with God, it also allows you the ability to be able to be compassionate to others. And you will be able to give them the same kind of compassion that God gives you. And then finally, love in. Calm your soul so that you may be at peace. So that you may be at peace. Why is this silence so important for you? Is because I've also noticed that in times of crisis and catastrophe, we can be overly self judging, hypercritical of ourselves, fault finding of ourselves as well. So calm your soul so that you may be at peace. Peace with God, peace with others, peace with yourself. Because again, remember, the battle is not what your circumstances are doing to you, but in you. Father, I thank you